I want to welcome everyone on behalf of the Calgary Anti-Oppression Network, and I'm going to ask Michelle Robinson to provide the acknowledgement of the land.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Michelle Robinson. My Indian Act Imposed status card says Yellow Name's Dene, but my grandmother says I'm Slavey Dene. I'm here because Rosemary asked me to come. And when I came, she was kind enough to give me tobacco. And as I've recently found out from some friends, there's not a lot of understanding why giving tobacco to an Indigenous person is of significance. And this tobacco isn't something that I chew. It's not something that I smoke. This is something that I pray with. And this is something that I give back to the land as the land gives me so much. My spirit name is Red Thunder Woman. And when I talk to Creator and I talk to the land and I talk to Spirit, I talk to them in my name that I was given by them, which is Red Thunder Woman. The skirt that I wear was made in ceremony. It was made so that I would have that continuous connection, my spirit, to the spirits of all around me, to the land, to the Creator, and to the bigger intention of positivity. So this tobacco, when it's given to us, it's not given to us to smoke. It's literally given to us to pray with. So when I took this tobacco and I could smell it and it was cleansing me and telling me that I need to tell you that this is one of our 4 medicines that we use. And as it was pointed out by a friend, many people have really negative connotations of what tobacco is because Health Canada and all of these colonized institutions have told you that it's negative and it's bad because they have taken it, raped the land, filled it with a toxic chemical, and then told you to smoke it in nice ads that now our tobacco and our medicine is looked at in a negative way. The reason why I was asked to come here and given this tobacco was to acknowledge the land that we're on. This land that we're on, a lot of people call Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And that hurts me. It hurts all of the Indigenous people of Turtle Island. Turtle Island is what you call North America. Canada, US, Alberta, states, these were all imposed. The Blackfoot Confederacy extended beyond the US-Canadian border. It goes beyond the Alberta-Saskatchewan border, and it goes beyond borders. This land that we're on is the Blackfoot Confederacy. The Blackfeet Nation are now forced to be south of the colonized border, the Canadian-US border. North of the border, we have the Bakani, the Siksika, and the Gunai Nations. Those are 2 of the largest reserves in all of Canada. And this city is completely surrounded by Indigenous reserves. I also want to acknowledge Treaty 7. So while this land was maintained for over 13,000 years by the Blackfoot, you call Canada 150 years old. Think of the gravity of that. Think of the gravity of the land that you're on and the privilege that you get at the oppression of other people. The Canadian government, the British government, made treaties with Indigenous people. And the Dene, that are the Tsuut'ina Nation, they signed on that. The Stoney Nakoda are now the Bearspaw, Chiniki, and Wesley tribes. They signed on to this, along with the Blackfoot Confederacy. You are treaty people. The Canadian government signed on your behalf. You have an obligation to the Indigenous people to treat them equally. And up to date, that has not been the case. I talked about my Indian Act Imposed status card because that's what it is. I don't think there's many people who can show me your race-based card that the Canadian government has issued you that they can use against you through CSIS and the RCMP. That card forced Indigenous people off this land that you're on right now and forced them onto reserves and forced them into Indian residential schools and forced starving policies so that you could live here right now, so that your land can be paid for through mortgages so that you can rent from somebody else who's paying a mortgage. Your existence is at the oppression of people. So when I do land acknowledgement, I honor the people, the Indigenous people from all across Turtle Island that has kept this land so that you can use it and you can exploit it and you can make money off of it so that you can live the life of luxury that you live. I was also asked to talk about how the land is connected to missing and murdered Indigenous women. Well, in order to take the land, you have to kill all the women. And the Canadian government has systemically done that. And today we are still in the middle of that genocide. Today, we still have women who are dying because of forced oppression and forced imposed poverty through the Indian Act that everybody else here gets to benefit from. When you say you're a proud Canadian to an Indigenous person, it is hurtful. And the reason why it is hurtful is that genocide is continuing today. I start off a lot of speeches by telling people I didn't get a free university education and I pay taxes like everyone else. Because unfortunately, in order for you to feel very good at night at sleeping on this land, you've been told many lies and a lot of propaganda about Indigenous people to feel comfortable continuing to live under this oppression. This oppression which South Africa used in order to model the apartheid system. The Indian Act purposely was designed so that white males could own this land. Because of that, Indigenous women are the most marginalized people. That is why we have so much missing and murdered Indigenous women today. Because of the stereotypes that we get a free ride, we get free taxes, we get free education. Even your mayor believes that. I had to talk to him about it. Because of these myths that have been told to Canadians and to new immigrants, today our women are the most marginalized group of people. I brought my drum to honor those women. We sing this song mainly for the families to try to help to heal them, because today we are still living under this genocide so that Canadians can live in peace. So I sing this song for the missing and murdered Indigenous women. And I also want to acknowledge the Two-Spirit. The Two-Spirit are what non-Indigenous call LGBTQ2+. And before forced colonization 150 years ago and the forced Christianity on these lands, being LGBTQ2+ was normal. And each nation had different terms for that. And the Indigenous had to come together at a certain point and say, what do we translate this pan-Indigenous term into for non-Indigenous people? And Two-Spirit was decided. Now, because of the taught homophobia and transphobia through Indian residential schools, our Two-Spirit are also incredibly marginalized groups. They're not safe on reserve anymore. But when they come into the cities, into a place that isn't welcoming to Indigenous people, they are further marginalized. That's why I'm a part of a group called Voices. Voices is a group of people who talk about the racialized issues that we have in the LGBTQ2+ community, that Indigenous aren't welcome, Asians aren't welcome, Black people aren't welcome in that community. Well, we disagree, and we've worked together to come together and talk about the racialized issues that we have, which is the base of everything we're talking about, white supremacy. So I'm going to sing this song for all of the Indigenous that are being murdered under the genocide, whether they're girls, whether they're women, or whether they're Two-Spirit.
Hey,
That song was done in 4 rounds. We do the 4 rounds to honor the 4 directions. I want to say thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited to hear the panel discussion, the poetry that's going to be coming. I'm really honored that you would invite me, Rosemary. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle, for the gift of your song and for the reminder of our histories and the oppression that is continuing today, and your acknowledgement of the land. It's really important. Thank you. So we've come together this evening to learn through poetry, personal narratives, and analytic prose from women, especially Muslim women, and what they have to say about discrimination in Islamophobia in Canada and in our communities. This way of speaking and engaging helps to breathe life into our understanding of intersectionality as the impact of multiple oppressions and how sisterhood requires an intersectional perspective. So before we start, before we hear from our speakers, I want to acknowledge the work of the Calgary Anti-Oppression Network, and we want to thank the Calgary Public Library for their commitment to public discourse about current issues. We also want to thank the designer of the poster and everyone else who helped promote the event. Thanks to those who made financial contributions, and if you want to make financial contributions, there's still opportunity. If you wish to learn more about the network and the campaigns of member groups, there are tables out front, and please have a chance to interact with those folks. Again, we have a donation box if you want to help fund some of the outstanding expenses from this event. Also note that we are videotaping. While the video will be primarily directed at the speakers, if you do ask a question during the session at the end, then you may be also recorded. So the process for the evening will be, there are 4 speakers, and then after the 4 speakers, we're going to open up the floor to questions. So we'll begin with our first speaker. Our first speaker is Ghada Alatrash, and she's a Syrian-Canadian author. She's a spoken word poet. She's going to be doing spoken word poetry, and she's a doctoral candidate and research assistant in educational research at the Werklund School of Education at the University of Calgary. She's been profiled in several media. She was a this past Wordfest author, and she's written Stripped to the Bone, Portraits of Syrian Women. She also co-authors the Syrian Women's Club of Calgary, and one of her goals is to amplify the voices of marginalized through her writings and translations. And we do have copies of her spoken poetry up at the front if you'd like to purchase them. So let's welcome Ghada.
Masa al-khair. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Rosemary, for the invitation. I'm always honored to speak and in the midst of all these wonderful people as well, and to speak on very important topics that I think should be addressed. Before I start with I'll introduce each piece on its own because they're very different pieces that I've chosen for you. It's always a very difficult choice because there's so much that I have written and I have translated. And so my goal in what I will do today and what I do on a daily basis is to amplify the voices of the marginalized, of the subaltern, and especially today in the midst of a very sad and disheartening political climate, in a place where we are banning and barring humans from entering one another's borders, That has applied to me as a Syrian, to my family as well, until some things were adjusted in the law over a weekend, but that's another story. And I think that it's really important to synthesize what has been desensitized. I think we can do so by way of stories. The stories to me are what humanizes what has been dehumanized. And so by way of story and by way of poetry and art, I would like to open way for an empathetic cultural understanding. It's a notion that I've come across in my research. Verstehen, I know that I probably have mispronounced it, but Verstehen is understanding or to understand in German. And Max Weber, who's a scholar and a sociologist, German, he introduced the idea of a cultural Verstehen, an empathetic understanding, so that we can build bridges and connect human hearts, because we all have the same color of human hearts, regardless of our skin color and religion and nationalities. So with that, as a Syrian, I can speak about Syria. And so what I've done is I brought the first piece, speaks about a Syria that you do not see in the media anymore, speaks about the Syria of Jasmine that I have come from. And I will begin with that note, and then we'll move to the Syria today. And I have chosen some music for us, and Nergis here, whom I met at the university a few weeks ago, is coincidentally also here, and she's going to help me with the music. So the first piece of music is for Lebanese, Marcel Khalifi. So you'll hear some of the oud. The oud is a big-bellied guitar, and it plays beautiful music, in my opinion at least. And the poem is written for our famous Syrian poet, Nizar Qabbani. I have translated his words for you. And I think it really captures the idea of an empathetic understanding, especially the second part of it. لا أستطيع أن أكتب عن دمشق دون أن يعرش الياسمين على أصابعي، ولا أستطيع أن أنطق باسمها دون أن يكتظ فمي بعصير المشمش والرمان والتوت والسفرجل، ولا أستطيع أن أتذكرها دون أن تحط على جدار ذاكرتي 1000 حمامة وتطير 1000 حمامة. أنا مسكون بدمشق حتى حين لا أسكنها، أولياؤها مدفونون في داخلي، حاراتها تتقاطع فوق جسدي، قططها تعشق وتتزوج وتترك أطفالها عندي. I cannot write about Damascus. I cannot write about Damascus without feeling the jasmine climbing on my fingers. And I cannot utter its name without tasting the juice of apricots, pomegranates, mulberry, and quince. And then I'm not able to remember it without feeling 1,000 doves perched on the wall of my memory and another 1,000 flying. I am haunted by Damascus. I am haunted by Damascus even while I do not reside in it. Its ancestors are buried within me. Its neighborhoods intersect on my body. Its cats fall in love, marry, and leave their kittens with me. When I was a diplomat in Britain, 30 years ago. My mother would send me letters with the arrival of spring. Inside each letter was a bundle of tarragon, tarhoon. The English were suspicious of my letters, so they took them to the laboratory, examined them under laser rays, and turned them over to Scotland Yard. But as they gradually became weary of me and of my tarragon, they asked, "Tell us, by God, what is the name of this magical herb that has dizzied us? Is it medicine? Is it a talisman? Or is it a secret code? What is it called in English?" I replied, "It is difficult for me to explain, for tarragon is a language that only the gardens of Damascus speak. It is our sacred herb, our perfumed eloquence. And had your great poet Shakespeare known of tarragon, his plays would have been better." In short, my mother is a very kind woman who loves me very much. And whenever she misses me, she sends me a bouquet of tarragon. To her, tarragon happens to be the emotional equivalent of Habibi, my beloved. As the English did not understand one word of my poetic argument, they gave me back the tarragon and they closed the investigation. Thank you. I have some time? Okay, great. So I have two pieces, one short one and one I will end with. The second piece I'm looking for it in my book. I should memorize the page there. So the second piece speaks about Homs, the Homs that you know today on the media, and the Homs that has been destroyed and suffocated in the Syrian war today. And so I'll speak about Homs through the eyes of one of my characters in my stories. She's a woman who lives in Vancouver, a Syrian woman who goes to Homs after the destruction and visits the streets of Homs. And the music for this piece was actually composed by my Syrian newcomer friend. Her name is Aya Mhanna. She composed this music especially for this piece. As she drove into Homs, she couldn't stop the tears from falling and her body from shaking. The taxi driver sympathized and said, "You must have not returned after the incidents." She shook her head, for words were suffocated in her throat. As she looked out of the car window, devastated at what her eyes saw, the familiar neighborhoods had now become ghost towns. Once upon a short time, only over 6 and something years ago, there used to be merchants roaming the streets and shouting artichokes, eggplants, tomatoes, cucumbers, ardi shoki, betinjan, benadora, khiyar. There were children running on their bicycles, music blasting in the shops. But today Homs was strangled. Cement buildings had collapsed like houses of cards. Faces of apartments were charred with missing balconies and walls. Cars were black, some half buried under the rubble and concrete. Everything looked dead. There was no sign of life. But one sign of life were the clothes hanging on clotheslines on empty balconies. She thought of the day when her mother would identify the neater housewife from the messy one by the way the clothes were arranged on the lines. She could even tell which housewives' whites were whiter than the others. There was also strict etiquette to be followed when it came to where to place specific clothing items. Undergarments, especially those that belonged to the females in a household, were to be placed on rows that were not exposed to other balconies on the street. You see, in Syria, clotheslines are more than mere strings on which clothes hang. Their culture, their etiquette, their tradition. They carry a mother's scent and the aroma of L'Oreal soap, and they narrate all kinds of tales about next-door neighbors and make known who's the tidier wife. And they announce the arrival of a baby and disclose whispers of wedding nights. Thank you. Are we done? Okay, I'll do this. This is a very important poem, I think. It won't take long. It's probably the most difficult poem for me to recite, and the word in this poem means mother of. Muhannad is mother of Muhannad. I wrote this poem after the bombing of the University of Aleppo. The music was also composed by the newcomer, Aya. And that's her voice. 5 a.m. The first day of exams at the University of Aleppo. She prepares breakfast for her son, Muhannad, who stayed up until 2 a.m. studying to the light of a candle for his architecture exam. The electricity was out yet again. She, Muhannad, she brews his coffee with extra cardamom and 2 over-full teaspoons of sugar, very sweet, just like him. She prepares mint tea just in case. By 5 a.m., on the table, a bowl of her homemade lebni, condensed yogurt, with olive oil and dry mint sprinkled on the top, a plate of cucumbers, the reddest tomatoes she could find, a bowl of green and black olives with pieces of lemons and stems of thyme, her handmade pickled makdous, eggplants, and sage bread she baked this week. She didn't have eggs, but Nabil, the neighbor, will deliver them later today. Tomorrow she will scramble them with parsley and onions, just as he likes them, for there's always tomorrow. 5 a.m. It's 5, Habibi. Your coffee is ready, and so is your breakfast. She doesn't eat, but she watches his hands as they move from one plate to another to the light of a candle. He holds her 2 hands and kisses them one by one and says, Yumma Habibti, mother, my beloved, pray for me. I will be back by 5, inshallah, God willing. 1 p.m. 2 explosions. 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. and Muhannad praying to an Allah deafened by the noise of praying mothers. 3 p.m. banging at the door, Nabil weeping, wailing, howling, pulling her hair, screaming. They bombed the University of Aleppo. Muhannad. 5 p.m. Muhannad. 6 p.m. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 a.m., 1 a.m., 2, 3, 4, waiting, 5 a.m., breakfast, is ready. A plate of scrambled eggs. Thank you.
That was such a powerful way to start. Thank you. So next we have Nadia Ramadan. She's going to tell us a personal story. So Nadia was born and raised in the city of Calgary. Her parents are originally from Egypt, and she is very passionate about helping immigrant women and their families. She currently works at Calgary Immigrants Women's Association as a family conflict counselor, and she's also the mother of an adorable 4-year-old.
Hello, can you guys hear me? Okay, I don't know how I follow that, but I will try. So my name is Nadia, and I told a friend of mine a story, an incident of what happened to me at a doctor's office, telling her that it was normal, and she's actually the one that responded and said, "This is not normal at all." Unfortunately, the story that I'm about to share, I think a lot of visible Muslim women can relate to. So I was at the doctor's office for my 4-year-old son. His name is Sino, Yasin. We call him Sino. I was with my mother, who wears the hijab full time, and I was actually wearing the hijab at that time as well. Sino was very hyper. In typical 4-year-old fashion, he was jumping from one chair to the other in the waiting room. I looked around to make sure he wasn't bothering anybody. He didn't seem to be, so I let him kind of bounce around. He sat on one chair and he started kicking his feet on it. A few minutes later, a patient walks in. She seemed irritated, frustrated. She continued to look my way. I assumed she was just upset. She's not in a good mood. She pointed at Sino and said, "Of course you wouldn't care about getting that chair dirty when your mother doesn't pay taxes." I was caught off guard and said, "Pardon?" And she said, "I sit on those chairs and your son has his feet on them. But of course you wouldn't care. You come to this country, you don't pay taxes, and you don't know how to raise your children." I asked her what made her assume that I didn't pay taxes. She said, "I know your type." She said, "You're not Canadian." I said, "I am Canadian." She said, "No, you're not. You definitely don't look like a Canadian." And she pointed at my hijab. At this point, my mother, who was with me and dreads confrontation, told me in Arabic to stop talking to her. She feared that something would happen, so she told me, "Stop it, Nadia." I responded to my mother in Arabic, and I said, "No, it's okay." So this lady mimicked our Arabic. And while she was doing so, my son found this amusing because he doesn't know what's going on, so he started laughing. And she responded to Sino, actually, and she said, "Yeah, you continue laughing. I hope you find that funny that your mother can't teach you any manners." And she said something about, "Yeah, you look very Canadian and you sound very Canadian too." Again, she pointed to our hijabs. I tried to ignore her comments. She continued saying things about not paying taxes and all of us Syrians coming in and ruining everything for her. Not Syrian, not that it mattered. So I continued to ignore her. At this point, my son had found another 4-year-old son, another 4-year-old boy, and they bonded over some Spider-Man game. And she looked at him and said, "I hope you learn manners from a real Canadian boy." Again, I tried to be calm, and as calmly as possible, I told her to please not speak to my son. She continued to say this is Canada, and that if I knew the legal system and the rights in Canada, she'd know that I would know that she has the right to speak to whoever she wants. I told her that although it wasn't any of her business, I was in fact born in Calgary. She said, "No, you weren't." She continued yelling that I didn't value this country, and all of those things. She continued making comments about my status in Canada, making assumptions that all of us Syrians don't know how to raise our children. Nobody said anything. There was a waiting room full of people. Nobody made a comment, nobody said a word, nobody stepped in. The conversation ended when I did ask her to stop talking to me and to stop talking to my son. I said, he is underage. If you have anything to say, please speak to me directly. It ended when she walked into the doctor's office, and I hadn't seen her since, and I didn't want any further altercation. As I mentioned earlier, I didn't pursue it. I didn't think much of it until I told a friend of mine. And she said, that's not normal, Nadia. Unfortunately, I always thought it was normal. And I think a lot of the hijab-wearing women around the room can say that they've experienced some sort of discrimination. So that's part of that story. And there was actually something that I wasn't intending to share, but since we're trying to be as authentic and as real as possible in order to make a change, I thought this might be the right platform. I did used to wear the hijab full-time. I took it off for completely personal reasons, nothing to do with any of this. And when I did choose to take it off, I assumed nothing would change. I didn't think people would change towards me. I didn't think people would be congratulating me. I got congratulations. I got, now you're a Canadian. And I got, I'm so glad you chose to be liberated. And that all would have been fine, but I was thinking, what if I reverse my decision? What if I have chosen to adopt the hijab? Would I still be getting congratulated? Would I still be getting thank you? Good job that you're liberating yourself, Nadia. And sadly, I don't think it is. So that's when I realized the hijab really is a sign of oppression to those who don't understand it, when really it's a choice. And it is a commitment between you, between that female and her God. So it was really sad to see the difference of reaction and the way that I have been treated recently. The way that I've been treated recently is absolutely normal. I've never known what it felt like to walk into a room and not have people stare at me, not have people ask me questions, not have people ask me if I'm used to the weather in Canada. So this is all very new to me, and it made me realize and appreciate how much, in fact, how strong and how much strength that Muslim women, visible Muslim women, all women in general have. But it's really, really sad that we constantly have to fight this image. And always, the most frustrating thing is to have to tell people and convince people that you're not oppressed, that you weren't in some sort of forced marriage and your husband forced you to wear the hijab. And I guess this has been a wake-up call for me, to really realize the way people talk to me differently, even in small talk. It really is different, and I'm saying this as a woman who's come from both, and I'm sure all the women in the room who have worn the hijab, if they haven't at one point, realize how differently, whether it's subtle, whether it's in body language, whether it's little remarks or comments, that a piece of cloth on your head can really drastically change the way people look at you. So that is my story. Thank you so much for listening. And I'm honored to be standing with these wonderful, talented women.
Well, Nadia, you did do a good job following up. Those are two very important stories to share. So our next presenter is Zainab Ramadan. She's going to be talking about, it's a little different than the title if you have the poster. She's going to share with us of Hijab and Hate, a conversation about white supremacy and Muslim women. Zainab was born and raised in Calgary, Alberta. She earned a BA in English from the University of Calgary, and her primary research interests are around Islamophobia, Canadian counterterrorism, legislation and the cultural protections of Canadian Muslims. So welcome.
Good evening. I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories of the Blackfoot and the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai. I would also like to acknowledge the Tsuut'ina, Stoney Lakota tribes, and Region 3 Métis Nations. The Calgary Central Library is situated on land adjacent to where the Bow River meets the Elbow River, and the traditional Blackfoot name of this place is Mohkinstsis, which we now call the City of Calgary. I'd like to thank the Calgary Anti-Oppression Network for organizing tonight's forum and the Calgary Public Library for hosting us. Special thanks to Rosemary Brown and Cherry Lohorn in particular for their help in the days preceding the event. My talk is entitled Of Hijab and Hate, a conversation about white supremacy and Muslim women. I was tasked with answering two questions in the course of my presentation. One, why women are often targeted by white supremacist hate groups, and two, why in particular Muslim women bear the brunt of Islamophobic harassment. To begin to understand why women, or more particularly women who subscribe to feminism, are often targeted by white supremacists and other hate groups, we must briefly review the foundations upon which their identity rests. Race is a social construct without biological meaning. The differences we see with our eyes, such as hair texture and skin color, are superficial and emerged as adaptations to geography. No greater significance can be assigned to our distinct appearances than this. However, this has not stopped white supremacists and other hate groups from trying. There are slight nuances in the significance attached to whiteness, dependent upon who is constructing its meaning at any given moment. The brand of white supremacy, made increasingly popular by the alt-right movement, is based upon the assertion that the biology of white, heterosexual men of European ancestry designates them to a superior class worthy of dominating all others. The concept of superiority necessitates the creation and maintenance of a hierarchy. While white supremacists assert that it is in fact the natural order that dictates people's place in the stratification of superiority, it is merely their own construction of whiteness that relegates people who are not white, heterosexual men of European descent to the hierarchical margins. Just as white supremacists imbue race with biological meaning, so too do they imbue gender with biological meaning. In the following quote from the Occidental Observer, an online publication about white identity interests and culture, Tom Sunic explains the way in which white supremacist groups understand women, writing, quote, "A woman becomes a woman only by virtue of contrast and comparison to her male companion. These principles of complementary polarity can equally well apply to different races. One becomes proud of his own race only when acknowledging the uniqueness of each race. The main point here is that it is only through their respective differences that men's and women's complementarity can be achieved." End quote. Here Sunic relies upon binary opposition to understand the genders. A binary opposition is a pair of related concepts opposite in meaning. In a binary opposition, like men and women earn a definition only when they are understood in a context related to men. In a binary opposition, one of the concepts typically assumes a role of dominance over the other. This concept of a binary opposition comes to us from Ferdinand de Saussure. When Sunic explains there are unique characteristics in each race, he means this is a result of biology, and he similarly asserts that biology is responsible for conferring certain characteristics upon women and men that inform their roles in society. When Richard Spencer was asked what the alt-right offered to women, he offered the following.
Alt-right offers much more for women than libertarianism, or certainly the left, which has created a tremendous amount of unhappiness. It's unhappy 45-year-old cat ladies. And I think libertarianism, which offers them only, the prospect of career advancement, is also equally dissatisfying, if not more so. I think the alt-right offers them a chance to certainly fulfill themselves, but also to do that special thing that only women can do, and that's be a mother.
What is the alt-right offering to women? I'm sorry I gave the microphone back, but what is it offering that other groups aren't? They offer a chance to be a mother.
I just answer. We offer them. I just answered the question. We offer them the happiness of true self-actualization.
So this means that the alt-right understands women's ultimate purpose is to have and raise children. Lana Lochtef, a woman running an alt-right media company promoting white supremacist views, proves that explaining that it's not that men who support the alt-right don't like women, it's that they see women as fundamentally different than men, with equally important roles, which are to perpetuate white bloodlines, to nurture family units, to inculcate those families with pro-white beliefs. As Sunak writes, feminism embraces legitimate rights of women to be treated like human beings, but it frequently denotes self-denial of women's biology and a radical ideology of male bashing. The issue white supremacists have, therefore, with women is when they make choices that deviate from their perceived and exclusive role as mothers, because to do so is a self-denial of their biological and therefore social purpose. Furthermore, women critiquing the position of privilege and power men enjoy is understood as a radical ideology of male bashing. So I'd like to conclude my response to the first question with a brief clip of Richard Spencer at a Texas A&M event. He says, quote, "We conquered this continent. Whether it's nice to say that or not, we won. And we got to define what America means. We got to define what this continent means. America, at the end of the day, belongs to white men." End quote. Spencer's rant begins by justifying white nationalism on the basis of the notion that white Europeans conquered the continent because they were smarter, stronger, and therefore superior. Foregrounding white men towards the end of his remarks serves to illustrate the clear privileging of white male identity in the white supremacist mind. The second question I'll be addressing tonight is why Muslim women bear the brunt of Islamophobic harassment. So the second question I'll be addressing tonight is why Muslim women bear the brunt of Islamophobic harassment in particular, and I think Nadia did a beautiful job of touching on that. So my remarks will really just expand. Muslim women bear the brunt of Islamophobic harassment if and when they are identifiably Muslim. In Algeria Unveiled, Frantz Fanon, anti-colonialist philosopher and revolutionary, writes, "It is by their apparel that types of society first become known." Despite instances of women from other faith and cultural traditions wearing head coverings like the hijab, the Muslim woman and her hijab is an object of particular scorn because it is a visual reminder of a perceived foreign presence. This is frightening for white supremacists who see their white nation increasingly invaded by foreign bodies covered unlike theirs, bodies with skin tones unlike theirs, and bodies with beliefs unlike theirs. Another reason Muslim women bear the brunt of Islamophobic harassment is something Fanon identifies in his ruminations about the dynamic between French colonizers and veiled Algerian women. He says, "This woman who sees without being seen frustrates the colonizer. There is no reciprocity. She does not yield herself, does not give herself, does not offer herself." End quote. So not only is a Muslim woman's covering perceived as a side effect of backwards patriarchy, insularity, and passivity, there is also an element of frustration in not having visual access to Muslim women's bodies. And Fanon here is directly speaking about the niqab, the face veil, but I think this applies to women who wear the hijab. It must be said that Muslim women are not the only people who bear the brunt of Islamophobic harassment. It is anyone who passes for a Muslim in the eyes of a bigot. Sikh men and women have shared this burden with Muslim women because they are frequently mistaken for Muslims, but also because their sartorial presentation marks them as a foreign presence also. Most days, wearing a hijab or scarf can feel like you have a target on your back. There are a variety of ways in which Muslim women present themselves sartorially. The more a Muslim woman decides to cover, the more likely she is to experience harassment. At best, you are subject to glares and disapproving nods that culminate in a climate of hostility as you go about your business. At worst, your physical well-being is in danger. In between, and more commonly, you might find racist slurs hurled at you, demanding you go back home. I've experienced all of these forms of harassment, and so have other visible Muslim women in my life. How do these forms of Islamophobia come to be produced? Popular culture, media coverage, political rhetoric, and legislation make the experiences I mentioned possible. They are all often informed by the Orientalist trope of the passive oppressed Muslim woman requiring rescue from her faith and culture, or by the trope of the intimidating social deviant. There's perhaps no better example to discuss the way this unfolds than in the question of niqab. I think it's fair to say at this point, attempting to outlaw ostentatious religious symbols, primarily the niqab, has become a provincial pastime in Quebec. Every couple of years, the province attempts to ban the niqab. Either the veiled woman is coerced out of her veil because it is assumed she was coerced into it, or because the fabric covering her nose and mouth is a national security threat, despite her willingness to show her face for the purposes of identification. Sometimes we hear both rationalizations simultaneously. No matter the thinly veiled attempts at justifying the ban, it is at the end of the day about targeting a minority within a minority to garner votes. I understand this event is about developing allyship, so I'd like to conclude with 2 remarks to that end. In the final book of his trilogy on Orientalism, Covering Islam, Edward Said explains, quote, "Malicious generalizations about Islam have become the last acceptable form of denigration of foreign culture in the West. What is said about the Muslim mind or character or religion or culture as a whole cannot now be said in mainstream discussions about Africans, Jews, other Orientals, or Asians," end quote. Related to this is an excerpt from Abby Ferber's book, White Man Falling, Race, Gender, and White Supremacy. She says, quote, "Racism is institutionalized in our society and culture at every level, shaping the lives of everyone. Defining white supremacy as extremist in its racism often has the result of absolving the mainstream population of its racism, portraying white supremacists as the racist fringe in contrast to some non-racist majority," end quote. My intent in highlighting these excerpts is to underscore the fact that anti-Muslim sentiments often go unchecked in our public and private discourse. Much of it goes untested because of what Said describes as a tolerance for malicious generalizations about Muslims. We have a lot of internalized anti-Muslim Islamophobic bias that we must and can confront in our own spheres of influence. Thank you for listening.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that and maybe offering a bit of a pathway forward. Our final speaker is Dalia El-Shafi Mustafa. She's a PhD fellow, and she's going to be talking about challenges and strengths of Canadian Muslim women. And Dalia is an award-winning, internationally recognized professional certified master life coach. She's a marriage and youth counselor with more than 15 years of experience. She is a PhD fellow in leadership policy and change with a focus on counseling psychology. Moreover, she's a leadership consultant, a wife, and a mother, and she pursues her work in English, French, and Arabic through 1 or more sessions at her Calgary office, and also offers workshops, seminars, and courses. So I look forward to Dalia's presentation.
Good evening, everyone. It is such an honor and a delight to be here tonight. Rosemary Brown, thank you so much for the invitation and for the Anti-Oppression Network. Challenges and strengths for Canadian Muslim women. Wow. Has I ever been faced with challenges as a Muslim woman living in Canada? Despite the many times that I try not to focus on this and to tune down the radio so that I don't get stuck in the challenges that I have been facing since I moved to Canada, actually, they do exist. I would like first to say thank you to Michelle. I learned a lot from you tonight that I wasn't aware of. So you opened for me the door to learn more new thing about the land that we honor. I'd like to thank Ghada for Immigrant poetry. It really touched the deepest of my heart. What Ghada did with this poem, she actually opened an old wound of a very dear friend called Marwa el-Sherbini. Marwa el-Sherbini was a school friend, university friend, a friend at the club in Egypt. She is a Muslim Egyptian woman wearing a veil. She was living in Germany. And unfortunately, a Russian person at the park when she was playing with her son, he tried to remove her scarf a couple of times. Marwa didn't want to let go of the event, and she chose that she's going to take this person into court and pursue a case for this person for violating her rights and practicing her freedom of religion. Unfortunately, Marwa was stabbed to death by this person in court, in front of the judges. She was pregnant in her 4-month-old son, and she had her 3-year-old son next to her. And her husband, Alwi, was next to her when this happened. And when he tried to rescue, there was no police guards actually in the courtroom by that time. By the time the police came in, they shot Alwi 3 shots. Marwa lost her life all of a sudden. The child was left with no mother at such a young age, and the father was in the hospital for a few months under severe trauma in the intensive care, and a whole family was shattered apart. Well, this actually left so many of us with a question. So what do we do when we are faced with such a thing? Do we keep quiet? Do we not voice out our concern? Shall we stand up? Shall we pass a comment that this is unacceptable, this is not tolerant? Shall we go to court? Or after what happened to Marwa, shall we remain silent and zip our mouth and take harassment, unpleasant comments, bad remarks? What shall we do? Well, definitely it's been a challenging question. But what we knew for sure is that every one of us as Muslim women, we should be proud of who we are. If we choose to wear the veil or not wear the veil, it's a personal choice. It's an act of personal freedom. Most of the time when I enter the room, I'm a public speaker, when I enter the rooms full of crowd, I can tell you this with honesty. The first 30 seconds, people look at me and you can see it clear on their eyes. What is this young Arabian girl wearing this headscarf is going to tell us? Well, if I'm not really confident of who I am, if I'm not really holding with so much power to my identity, believing in who I am, my choice of this veil that I'm wearing, my right to practice my religion in the way that I want without bothering anyone or offending anyone, I step out there, deliver my speech, and people at the end stand and applaud. Well, I'm able to deliver my message, but are all women having the same degree of confidence? No, people vary. There are people here in this room who are going to be much more confident than who I am. There are people who are going to vary in their confidence degree. So Muslim women, like any other woman, all women actually, all minorities, all visible minorities, they need to be embraced. They need to be accepted. Well, I remember a couple of years ago, I was in Salzburg in a conference, and I could tell once I stepped on the bus, every single person on the bus stared at me. And I had 2 options, either to smile and ask people, probably I'm the first young lady who ever come to this young city with a veil. Do you have any questions about Islam? Or I could have gotten angry. And I chose the first option. I chose to smile. I chose to extend a bridge. I chose to welcome people and laugh and say, I'm a Muslim, I'm proud to be. Do you have any questions for me? And we started talking and we started engaging. But again, how many Muslims are going to do that? We need, in Canada, We receive so many immigrant women. Yes, we give courses for language. Yes, we give courses and we support women during pregnancy to look for career, but we actually need to give courses for this adaptation. We need actually to help women to feel more comfortable under their own skin. I'm a coach and counselor. I get to see young kids as little as 6 and 7 years old. They are being bullied at school because of their religion. They are called names that they are terrorists. They are called that they look different. Their skin color is different. 6 years old. These children, boys and girls, are damaged. What kind of a confidence and self-esteem this generation is going to grow up with? Well, if there is really a message I'd like to convey through this platform today, I would like the media to stop attacking Muslim people. The problems I get to see is not only with the children. I get to see lots of people in their 18 years old and early 20s, and they are shaking in their identity. Nobody wants to be friends with them. They feel that they are isolated, they are not fitted, they are not fitting, they are not accepted, they are not belonging. And you know what's the sad thing? They start a question. Shall I remain a Muslim? Do I need to change my religion for people to accept me? I do not think that this is the Canada that we all want. I know that Canada always respected the Charter's right. Canada always respected freedom of religion, freedom of practice, freedom of speech. Well, to tell you another story, a couple of years ago, I had a friend of mine who called me on the phone, and she was so much in panic. And she said, Dalia, why do they hate us? And I said, who hate you? And she said, Canadian. And I said, what happened? Did something bad happen to you? She said, no. I said, are you okay? Your husband, children? She said, yes. I said, then what happened? And she said, there was this girl who came actually in the parliament, and she spoke about a bad experience that happened to her. And I told my friend, I said, my dear, it's her experience. Did anything happen to you? She said, no, but I might be next. And this is why, agree or disagree with me, I never talk about Islamophobia. Because the more I talk about a phobia, the more I actually let both Muslims and Canadian focus on this phobia, and it propagates more. If I talk about any of you about the phobia of elevator, of an accident that happened in an elevator, probably few of you, before leaving here, if you were to take the elevator, you're gonna think a little bit about it. And that's the way it is. But even though that I don't talk about Islamophobia, it does exist. And I honor people like Saima Jamal sitting here today, standing up and speaking about Islamophobia. So what do I do on my end? What I do on my end, I try just to be a comfortable Muslim under my own skin. A couple of years ago, I was hospitalized at Foothills, and I had to stay 6 weeks in the cast. My husband used to finish his work at 5 o'clock, go back home, get my mom, who is an elderly, handicapped, on a wheelchair and very sick. My mom used to cook for me every day for a whole 6 weeks. My husband would finish his work, come, take my mom, who lives with us, and come to visit me at the hospital. And everybody would be, wow, your husband and mom come to visit you every day. They are bringing food, not only for you, but for the nurses, for the staff, for your roommate at the hospital as well. So I didn't speak anything about Islam, but our manners did talk about it. And this is what the poetry of Ghada does. This is actually what the story of Nadia does. This is actually what Zainab, legacy in life, does. This is what lots of Muslims do. We're just living our life. But what do I want? I want to say that it's time that we all gather and fight stereotypes. Yes, I am being labeled. People perceive me in a different way because I am veiled. I remember a couple of years ago, I was I was doing my PhD at McGill University. I was entering the university, and I found all my friends, the Canadian, gathering around me and like, Dalia, what happened? And I'm like, what happened? Is there anything that happened today? And people were like, there is this niqabi girl who came in television. This story was in Quebec, I think, 7-8 years ago. And there was this girl who came in television and she put a complaint forward that she's not having her rights in Quebec. But let me here be fair to both parties, because it's such a controversial topic. This girl actually wanted to go for a French class. So the teacher asked her to kindly remove the niqab, this part of the niqab, so she can pronounce the vowels, A, E, O, U. And then this girl, she said, I want all the class to stand up, it was more than 45 students, and face the wall. That's not right. And then it turned out actually that this girl was not the one who registered for the course. It was actually someone else who registered for her, because she even didn't want to step in and do the preliminary exam and remove the niqab. Well, there is rights and responsibilities on both sides. Let's move to another challenge. Racial profiling. Wow. Me at the airport. Wow. That's not fun. I actually had a hip replaced when I was 16 years old. So I'll always beep at the airport. And unfortunately, it's my luck that every time I'm traveling, it's either there is like a shooting here or a bombing here. So I tell myself, okay, I am gonna take more in security. So I also have two options, either to be angry about it or to prepare myself and say, these security guards are doing that job. I was in California in a fundraising event 2 weeks ago. And this was the first time ever that something like this ever happened to me. The security guard chose me and she said, I am doing a training and I'm going to train on you. I would have loved actually that she would have asked my permission, because it's my permission if I'd like to volunteer in this or not. And she actually did a search for 30 minutes, like I've never been searched before. I can assure you that if lots of Muslim women would undergo by such thing, they will not tolerate it. But I tried to tell myself, Dalia, you come from an academic background. You support training. This person wants to train this young person to become a security guard. So remain patient. And after she finished, I passed to her the comment. I said, nobody ever in my whole life searched me for 30 minutes. Are you aware that I could have missed my flight? She said yes. And I replied to her, I chose actually to radiate compassion and love. And I said, you know what? Despite the fact this was unpleasant for me and uncomfortable, but I appreciate that you're taking the time to train new people on how to do their job. And I told her, by the way, if we actually do a random check on on the people in the airport, probably they forgot how to do the real basics that you do. And this lady turned out to me and she said, may I ask you a favor? Could you kindly pass a compliment about the way I did my job for my supervisor? And I was like, she was really doing her job. So again, it's my perception as a Muslim. What kind of energy I'm having toward this? Do I just want to be angry and feel that it's a hostile situation immediately? Or do I want to keep calm? And I always choose to keep calm. I have one of my clients once came and she said, you know what, there is discrimination. I call people in the phone and they say, welcome, please come. And she's selling insurance. And then once I step and I knock on the door and they see me with their veil, lots of them doesn't want me to enter. She was a Muslim young lady. And I asked her this question. I said, let me ask you this question. If we exchange situation and you are in your home and someone call you, and then once they show up on the door, you discover they are a rabbi having curly hair. Are you gonna let them in? She said, no. I said, well, it's good to understand, to put yourself in other shoes as well. We're trying to build a dialogue between the challenges and the strengths. Well, let's move to work discrimination. I remember I was running for election at the university for the student society. And I was the first ever Muslim, veiled, Arabic, Egyptian girl to ever run an election. And my posters were all over the university. And then my supervisor came, my PhD supervisor came, and he said, Dalia, you know what? You should think of removing your veil. And I was like, wow, we've been working together for a couple of years. You never told me anything about this. There is other veiled girl in the lab. Did you speak with them about the same idea as well? And he said, no, I am concerned about you. And I said, why me? And he said, because you are successful. And I was like, so because I am successful, you're asking me to remove my veil? Why? And the answer was, to succeed more. And I replied and I said, first of all, according to the Code of Ethics of the university, it is prohibited that a professor would speak with his student about any religion matter. Second of all, I am a Muslim. You have no religion. I've never spoke about that. And I respect where you come in place of religion. So you just need to respect who I am. Well, have I been through any challenges as a Muslim? Yes, I remember a previous employer actually. Once he spoke very bad about my religion. He was technically wanting to take us as a group at lunch where I am fasting. And it's like, you should not fast, you should not pray, Islam is a bad religion, you should not follow Muhammad. And I'm like, that's my personal freedom. You should not actually talk about that as an employer. And if I'm working in a job and I'm earning money, then you are threatening me. It's coming from a place of power. I remember when I was very young, I was on a trip with my mom in Florida. And there was this driver actually, I was very young by that time. And he actually said, you have to remove the veil. And he got so angry and I got so scared. And I said, you know what, could you really stop the car here? I don't feel comfortable continuing this ride. So, these are a few of the challenges. As a matter of fact, they don't actually play in my mind at all. I just remembered them today for the sake of this conversation. I chose not to focus on the challenges, and I chose to stay focused and determined. I have a legacy to empower women in general, from all religion, from all background, from all cultures. Women need to feel confident under their own skin, being able to use their voice, set up the boundaries, whether at home, whether in a relationship, whether with their colleagues or whether with their employer, they need to be able to set the boundaries. So we actually need to teach them how to do that. So we need more of education. Education is power. So if we in Canada, we receive newcomers, we receive immigrants, we receive refugees, we need to have designated classes about life skills, how to adapt. We need the media actually to interview more prominent figure from the Muslim community, from the Jewish community, from the Christian community, from all the communities. I get to see a generation of teen girls and they tell me, we want to have a role model. Why don't we see Muslim role models in TV interview? Why aren't there news in newspaper? And it's not easy to make it there. Because the media, they want the propaganda and they want to sell fast. They want the topic that are going actually to be read more. But I think this is a time that we need more inspiration, that we need people who are more centered on building bridges, on creating dialogues. You have seen a couple of veiled women in the room today. I'm sure every one of you had a neighbor, a colleague who are a Muslim. And this is actually your perception about Muslims. These women out there, their code of ethics, their integrities, their values, their success, their achievements, speak out for them. Speak out for their religion. We just need to help them more, that their voices be heard. Today our event is called Sisterhood is Global, Women Voices. So we need actually to help all visible minorities to actually make their voices heard out loud, to encourage more, to feel fitting, accepted, and belonging, to show them the path and to stay next to them, supporting them on this path. We need to have a time to stop talking about the problem itself and stop creating solutions and helping with new programs to be creating for both parties, for Canadian and for Canadian Muslim people in general, for men and for women. And to let you know this before I leave the stage, how am I doing with time? 1 minute. I get to see lots of oppressed men as well. Could be men in their job, they are being bullied because of their religion, or it could be men in the university, or as little as children. So we need to come up to more conversational dialogue, to action items, to group discussion, and then to have a plan, and then to start building that bridge. I am a firm believer of building bridges, of blending. Yes, I am Canadian from Egyptian roots. I honor being Egyptian. I honor being Canadian, but I have a legacy to create that blending without losing my identity. And I would love to see more Canadian embracing Muslim women. And I would love also to see on the same context, more Muslim women knowing how to be more confident, more comfortable under their own skin, more comfortable to stand up, to talk, to defend their rights, and to be able to deliver the beautiful message for their beautiful essence and shine their light. Thank you.
Well, I guess we have a bridge going forward. Thank you for starting us off. If you could join me in thanking all the speakers who've shared their knowledge and stories and insights. And it really has been very enlightening. Okay, and I'll ask all the presenters to come to the stage. We have some seats. So we're gonna open up for questions, and we ask that you be respectful and limit yourself to one question that's rather brief, and you can direct it to one of the members of the panel or to the whole panel. And I'd also like to ask you to come to the microphone. So the microphone's up front. Yeah, there's one on both sides. So I know somebody is really intrigued, and we've certainly learned a lot. Anybody? Okay, please come forward. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm the opinions editor at The Wheel. It's a state newspaper, and I recently wrote an article on Bill 62 in Quebec and how it's affecting Muslim women there. I interviewed another practicing Muslim colleague that I have, and she chooses not to wear a veil. And when I asked her, what the veil represents and things like that, she just said she kept repeating, it's to protect us from men, it's protect us from men. And so my question to her was, why not instead teach men to be respectful towards women and not have to do that for men? And just as a feminist talk this way, I just kind of wanted to see thoughts on that, and so we can see from both sides, for men and women, how it's equal rights for both men and women to treat them as not just animals that can't control themselves or something like that. So I just wanted another viewpoint. She didn't really know how to answer that question for me. So,
who wants to start?
I can start. So it's very important when we speak about immigrant women, okay, to know the culture that they grew up. Lots of immigrant women, they grew up in cultures of fear, in families that don't treat actually men and women equally. Lots of them actually, lots of culture, they tried to tell the woman to cover and protect. And I'm speaking here about culture. They told women that the man is always going to be after you. Because this is how so many women, not all of them, but how so many women, immigrant, have been programmed. I get to see lots of women in their 30s that actually have no connection with their sexuality, because when they were young, they were told that they should really hide their feminine part inside of them and take the masculine role to always be there, up there, to protect themselves from any men who who can actually violate their right or actually tempt them in any word. So we need to understand that in Canada, if we are receiving immigrants, some of them are going to have this background. Can you repeat your question again, please? I want to use the same wordings.
Okay. She just basically said when I interviewed her that she chooses not to wear one because she said it's not oppressive because you choose whether you're going to wear one or not. And so she basically said that she thinks that how she dresses is modest enough. She did explain to me like the cultural with the niqab and stuff. She said she lived in Yemen and that was Yemen's culture. It wasn't Islam culture. They were just trying to combine the two, I guess.
So I put my hijab, I think I was 21 years old, and actually my parents were asleep. They didn't know actually I had the hijab on. So they received phone calls from my friends saying, oh my God, Dalia put the hijab on, Dalia put So when I returned back, my father asked me and he said, when are you gonna take this off? I said, I want it. I want this. This is what I want. He said, are you sure of your decision? I said, yes, this is my decision. So I can tell you that in a country where I grew up like Egypt, I am veiled today. I'm exactly the same person as I was a few years back without having the veil. Nobody has forced me to wear it. I am not oppressed. My sweet, darling husband is here. He's a loving, caring husband. So by any means, I don't live any oppressed life. Let's move to the niqab. It's a personal choice whether a person would like to wear it or not. Me as a person, I advocate that it is the right for every person to choose their right. However, if I'm in an airport or entering a university campus, I would really appreciate to see the face of the person that I am dealing with. With all the terrorism happening all around the world, it makes me more comfort as a human being to know who is the person I am interacting with. I remember a couple of years ago, I was interviewed on CTV for the niqab issue. It was by the time President Sarkozy has passed a very harsh comment that women wearing niqab are like tombs walking around. And I found out that this was very harsh, that he actually labeled a niqabi woman who chooses to wear a niqab that she is a tomb walking, because she has her rights. We live in Canada. There are women in bikini, women in shorts, women who like to cover themselves. There's all kinds of things. So for as long as you are not violating security, for as long as you're not stepping on the right of others, it is your personal choice to do whatever you want. Did I answer your question?
Just to clarify, like just on I don't want to sound like I'm against it in any way. It was just for research for my paper. I was just thinking like on the male end of the spectrum, like just the equality on that part, just saying that it's protecting women from men as if they have no control.
So I wonder if, and maybe some of the other panelists want to respond to that question. So the initial comment was that the colleague that she interviewed said that her belief was that women were wearing the hijab to protect themselves against men. So maybe if some of the other panelists could respond to that.
Everybody's looking at me. So I can talk about the reason I choose to wear hijab. From my perspective, it is mandated in the faith that I wear it, not because of man, not because of women, because God has simply commanded it. It is something that it's a way for me to have a relationship with God. The other thing about wearing the hijab is that I love for people to know that I'm a Muslim right away. The other thing about hijab is that it's probably the most feminist thing about me because I decide who sees what of me and when. So I think it's awesome.
You can applaud if you want.
I think it's wonderful that you're here and asking these questions because it sounds like the more Muslim women you can speak to, the better. So thank you for answering the question.
I think there's another comment.
Yes, I do want to talk, and I hope I'm answering your question. But I think it's also important to acknowledge that the fact that we can't stereotype about men either. I have 2 boys. I am raising them to be feminists. If you speak to them, and you ask them what are your roles, one of them is to be a feminist in life. And so I think it's really important that we don't stereotype anyone. I think it's individual people. My father was a big feminist, and you know, he's my idol in life. And I just want, because I have poetry that speaks to this, one of my favorite poets is Palestinian Mahmoud Darwish. Are there Palestinians here in the audience? Oh, okay, that's right. Yes, I knew that. So, because I saw a Palestinian for Justice sign outside, I think, or I was told. But he says, so he is one of my favorite poets. He's a man. And in this poem, he represents me as a woman. And he says, he writes this, not a woman. I am a woman, no more and no less. I live my life as it is, thread by thread, and I spin my wool to wear it, not to complete Homer's story or his son. And I see what I see as it is, in its shape. I am a woman, no more and no less. أنا امرأة لا أقل ولا أكثر. Just a little more here that you have to hear. I am who I am, he says. I am who I am, just as you are who you are. You live in me, and I live in you, to and for you. I love the necessary clarity of a mutual puzzle. I am yours when I overflow the night, but I'm not a land nor a journey, he says. I am a woman, no more and no less. And I tire from the moon's feminine cycles, he says. And my guitar falls ill string by string. I am a woman, no more and no less. Just to be fair.
Thank you. I wonder if, Nadia, if you wanted to comment.
I completely agree with the other ladies here on the panel. And the reason that I had worn the hijab previously had nothing to do with a man. And in fact, the reason that, as Zainab mentioned, it is a command from God. And primarily what I was taught, and what I still believe, is that women are beautiful beings. And because they are such beautiful beings, they're often judged primarily on looks. So the whole point was to cover up so that you are judged for what is inside rather than what is on the outside. So it had nothing to do with, and I do appreciate the boldness of the statement, and a lot of people do have that misconception that Muslim men are some sort of pigs that will rape anybody if they're not veiled, which...
I just want to I don't think that.
No, not you. No, but the...
Playing devil's advocate a little
Yeah,
bit.
no, absolutely. And I'm saying I appreciate you being able to ask so honestly, and I think that's the whole point of this, is that we're trying to create a safe place where people can ask the tough questions, because you're going to get a bunch of different answers. But yeah, my whole point was that I want to be judged based on the internal rather than the external.
Awesome. Thank you.
So the panel's ready for tough questions. They're ready. Who's next?
I'd like to add just
Sure.
one thing for her. Nuns as well, they hide their hair. Jewish women as well, after they get married, they do hide their hair. So it's actually a kind, in Islam, what they say is treating women like a piece of jewel, like she is jewel. As Zainab has said, I decide to reveal what I want people to see and how they see it and when to see it. So that's about it.
Linda.
Hi. Thank you very much. I'm Linda McFarlane. Thanks for being here. I'm taking a course in French. It's French conversation. And today, of all things, we were discussing the burqa, niqab, and hijab. And I was really distressed because the class, small class, 6 people, generally very liberal, progressive people, all agreed with the France, and apparently the European Court of Human Rights has agreed with France to make a law against wearing the full face covering. And the reason European Court said, I think it was so they can better live together, you know? And I just thought, oh my God, and I was really shocked by that a Court of Human Rights would say that, and shocked by so many people in the class being like, yeah, that's right, you know, and their reasons were security, safety and security. So I don't know, any comments? I guess a lot of European countries are being there are fines, and one country, I think Belgium, even going to put people in jail for wearing whatever.
I could be wearing my hijab, and in the airport, if the person who searched, she finds something here, she can tell me, would you please enter the room to remove the scarf so I can double check that there is nothing there. I won't be offended by that. The same thing for a niqabi girl. She can always remove that small piece at security to show her face, or if she's picking her kids from school, or if she's doing work with the government, she has the choice to do that.
Other folks?
I think in these countries they were saying nothing, not wearing it in public, in universities and hospitals. You know, it was more a general thing, very shocking.
One of the problems that happened in France, there was a time where some terrorists, they used to wear as niqabi women and do terrorist work. But this, again, if you always want to identify people, you can always ask them to remove that piece and make an identification.
Do other panelists want to comment?
I haven't heard of any Muslim women who wear the niqab refusing to identify themselves when they've been asked. They're more than happy to do that. I personally haven't heard that. I was reading something interesting. It's sort of tangentially related to our conversation, and I wondered if I could share it. So, and Arabic speakers can confirm or deny what I've read, but I read that the etymology for the Arabic word for veil, niqab, means to perforate, excavate, investigate, traverse, or travel through a place, which I thought was so interesting because often the conversation is that a Muslim woman who veils is very limited in the scope of where she can go and what she can do in public life. So it's interesting that is the etymology. Just wanted to share that.
Anyone?
We have a niqabi in Calgary. Her name is Shaimaa Safwat, and she's very well known on social media. She's very outgoing. She's very pleasant. I think anyone who would like to talk with a niqabi, Shaimaa would be willing. And she speaks about her niqab. She goes live on Facebook. She's so proud of her identity, comfortable under her own skin, and she's a very pleasant person to know. So I'll definitely recommend that anyone who would like to know more about niqab, how is the niqabi life, to be in touch with her or follow her on social media. Shaimaa Safwat.
Oh, I agree with you. I think even these people are saying, oh, well, if somebody is sitting in a university classroom, their face should be visible at all times. And so they, you know, even if people are willing to show their face wherever for security, it seems to me it's not right to make them show their face the whole time they're in class or hospital or wherever. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
I think it's, I just want to add something. I think it's really sad that we've come to a point where we have to debate what a woman can or cannot wear. And in terms of security thing, that's our minds, our brain is meant to protect us, to keep us safe. So everywhere around, we're looking to ensure that we're in a safe place. So the minute you put in security or safety or threat, people are more likely to agree. And if I were, for example, to commit a terrorist act, I would never be dressed in a niqab. Like and niqabis know that people are looking at them. So in fact, they will be more likely to follow the rules and to go above and beyond to make you feel comfortable because they know you're looking at them.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, more questions, please. So I have a question while we're waiting for the next question to come to the mic. How can you give us a couple of tips for how to be a good ally as a non-Muslim woman?
I do. I have some, actually. I believe in listening to one another's stories directly without any intervention of the media, intervention of, whatever, however you find your truth and knowledge. I've learned from one of my professors, I wish I could even say his name, but I think for ethical reasons I can't, but he's told me that there is no truth, there is no knowledge, there's no such thing. Even the dictionary, he actually questions me when I quote something from a dictionary. We have to listen to one another, allow for ourselves to go and ask, like you ladies have said, to ask, to understand what is the hijab, what is your culture, what is your story. And I think that empathetic understanding can only be achieved by way of communicating, by way of knowing one another. I'm working with the Syrian refugees. They have told me again and again, they don't know how to approach the Canadians. The Canadians say, we don't know how to approach the Syrians. So we've started this, and this answers your question, I think. I'm a Rotarian, so we started this beautiful program where we basically match one Syrian family to one Canadian family. And what I do, basically, I contact people like Saima or like Sam Namura at the Syrian Refugee Support Group if I run out of names, and I tell them I need a family. The Canadians say we want a family with 2 kids or with adult kids or whatever, depending on their situation. We create that friendship. We plant the seed, and then you wouldn't believe what's happened over the past year and a half. The Syrian families' children's names are under the Christmas trees in those Canadian homes. They call one another families. The barriers are immediately dismantled when you actually start communicating, because we're all human. We really are. We just create all these phobias, but at the end of the day, we're all humans. I think you can come and speak to all of us and find so many more similarities than differences. So it's just by way of connecting.
And I think you said earlier that our hearts were all the same color.
Red.
So, I wonder if we should go to the next question. Oh, okay. Sure, please.
Hi, Ronnie Joy here, and I'm an activist, academic. I also lead Dances of Universal Peace. And I really appreciate the different perspectives that have been shared. I think one of the things is to understand that not everyone from a group thinks the same way. So this has been really delightful, actually, to hear different perspectives. One of the things that I wanted to ask about, seems to me there's a difference when looking at issues of systemic racism and systemic oppression, and Annette and I were talking about this. So we have a system which is based on power and domination and oppression, where racism has always been used as a way to divide people. And I'm thinking symbols of culture and nationality have the dominant group, like when we look at treatment of Indigenous people and the outlawing of traditional religion and symbols. That's been done historically in Canada to many groups. So I wonder if we can see the treatment of Muslim women as an extension of that policy, treating people as the other, who don't deserve the same rights. Because religious symbols have been apparent in Canada for a long time. When they're from the dominant group, they're very visible, like in the residential schools. So I wonder if it's helpful to see the systemic issues of power, and while at the same time honoring the importance of expressing compassion and love, and understanding that we are all the same, we are all human, and yet understanding that these systemic issues can create barriers, but together we can work as allies to really be together with each other.
So, was anybody interested in tackling that? So I guess the question is really, how do we understand systemic issues that perpetuate some of the Islamophobia centered around religious symbols?
I was in Vancouver, and I was in a museum there, and there was a display of Indigenous headdress, and there was a quote kind of engraved on the glass that talked about how the Indian agents asked the Indigenous person who was wearing the headdress to remove it, otherwise they would be persecuted, or they would be prosecuted for this. And that was in 2015, so that was around the time that our friend Harper was trying to ban the niqab and using that as a tool to win the election. And I saw a lineage in that. When I saw that, I knew exactly what that woman from so many years ago was talking about, because it was happening to me today. So I'm so glad that you bring up this idea of there being a trajectory and a shared history in that way. Thank you so much for bringing that up.
It's a really excellent example. Is there another question here? Or
I think she addressed it, but
Put in your own
I'm just going to maybe add on to that a little bit, or branch off of it. I think she mostly was addressing what I was going to get at, because I actually feel like that empty chair is Michelle's, because she really centered this night for me.
Absolutely.
And Yeah. And I'm wondering what you all, and maybe if you don't mind, if Michelle also would like to respond to this, how we get from just talking about the relationship between newcomers, in particular Muslim women, and Canadians, how we get past that to the broader context here, which is that Canadians are continuing to oppress Indigenous people. I am amongst them. I'm a settler from Treaty 4, and I live between Treaty 4 and Treaty 7. So I'm just wondering, and if you don't mind extending the mic to Michelle, if she also would like to speak to that.
Michelle, do you want to come to the stage? We would most welcome you. And right in the center.
Thank you. This is hard for me to listen to because, from my personal opinion, I have literally watched, the European white males dominate the conversation to the point that now we have women here having to defend why they wear a niqab. And that's so unacceptable because it is patriarchy. And it's also racial. And that's the base of the problem. The only reason why we have boundaries of Canada, US, the states, the provinces, the territories, is because somebody else came here and put them in, not because we all agreed and decided to it. And to me, debating how women are dressing is just an extension of that. I found it ironic. Two of the speakers that did come up, they were both wearing toques, and we aren't ripping off their hats saying, how oppressive are you? Like, you just let that cold weather oppress you and give you frostbite. Oh, right, it's a Chinook. We don't do that at this time. Why are we having this discussion of why these women are supposed to be dressed a certain way or not dressed a certain way? And the reason why is because the media is controlling this narrative, and the non-Indigenous are in charge of it. And I just don't even recognize this conversation in that sense that, my people right now, today, our boys are still bullied to cut their braids. Today, this is 2017. We talk about feminism and equality and yada, yada, yada. I have an Indian Act imposed status card. And I have that on purpose so that Canada can exist. And our people did not agree to any of this. Muslims have been here since the 20s in Alberta. And there was no conversation about what they can and cannot wear. To me, I find it demeaning to be asking Muslim women why they're wearing a niqab or why they're not. Why are these women wearing hats?
They're wearing hats to protect themselves from men.
Exactly. It's hard for me, so I don't mean to take the mic. But.
So maybe we can move to the question.
Yeah, my question was mainly about, so I grew up in Turkey from the ages of 3 to 12. And when I was there, there was always a lot of, no matter what time of the day, no matter what was going on, there was always a lot of Muslim people around because obviously it's like 99.9% Muslim. But then on top of that, there was the songs coming from the mosques that would play with these loudspeakers every morning, 5 times a day. And there would be huge gatherings of people. And I just feel like in Calgary, I don't get an opportunity to see that for Muslim people to basically be able to come together and celebrate out in the open. And I was wondering if that had to do with either A, I've only been here a year and I just don't see it, or if you feel like it has something to do with specifically Calgary versus, or Canada or North America versus where I came from, Turkey or Syria or wherever you guys are from. So I think two or three of the panelists are from Calgary, so I don't know if you can.
Who wants to take that question?
Sure.
So yeah, you're talking about the call to prayer that emits from various mosques. I think if we started to petition for the call to prayer to be emitted outside of the mosque, like people would have a problem with that, big time. Muslims continue to gather 5 times a day. That's a gathering place, the mosque, I mean. The Arabic word for that is masjid. So I would love that. I was walking in a neighborhood near Mission, and I heard there's this beautiful old church there, and I heard the bells ringing, and I thought it would be so beautiful if I could experience that too in my own way, in the form of, you know, hearing the call to prayer being emitted, and to just be in a space where we're hearing the church bells ring, and then we're hearing the call to prayer, and, you know, various iterations of that sort of thing that exist in other people's faith traditions or no faith tradition. So, yeah, that's my response.
I think there's another comment.
Yes, it's very, very sad and disheartening that the call to prayer, which was I grew up in Syria until I was 13, and then I moved to the US, and then we went back and forth, so I'm connected still. But when I go back to an Arab country, it is, if you haven't experienced it, it is the most powerful and beautiful, forceful, you know, feeling that you can really experience when everybody is listening to these 2 words, Allahu Akbar. What's so sad is that we have to address that systematic, hegemonic, ideological, you know, poisoning in the minds of the Western masses that has made that most sacred word, Allahu Akbar, means God is the greatest. God is the greatest. It doesn't get any more holy than that. That has now been that has become equal to terrorism, a call to terrorism, a call to murder. And it is actually injected into the minds of the people. And I think we have to hold sittings like this and conversations like this and dialogues like this to counter the very dangerous media representations or misrepresentations that are becoming normalized as the truth. And so, Allahu Akbar, oh my God, how beautiful is that? And again, I hope all of you get to experience that call one day. And sadly, it's now been equal to terrorism. So I think that's one of the more important reasons why this would not be accepted, because people relate that now to the worst, right?
It's actually on my bucket list to be able to hear the call to prayer in a Muslim majority country. So, did you have a follow-up? Or
I didn't want it to be all about the call of prayer, because I loved the call of prayer when I was growing up. It was always beautiful and it would just ring throughout the city. But just being able to congregate as a group, do you feel like you have the same opportunity here as you did back in Syria or wherever you're from? And then the question I would actually like to extend into the Indigenous community, and to hear if you feel like you are also allowed to sing and do the ceremonies. Thank you. The ceremonies that are a big part of your culture. So.
A lot of the newcomers actually might not know that it was actually illegal for more than 3 Indigenous people to gather, and that was only recently ended. And to this day, and I live in Abbeydale. I ran for city council, and one of the reasons why I ran was in my own neighborhood, Colton Croshoe was murdered. And Colton Croshoe is this young Indigenous man who was murdered. And his family wanted to have a gathering at Abbeydale Community Hall, and they wouldn't open the community hall for the family. So we gathered on the lawn, which we were completely surrounded by police, and the police helicopter went over us. And that's now. That's not yesterday. That's not because there's an oppressive law. But at the end of the day, when natives start coming around, the very first thing that happens is that the police are called. during Occupy, one of the reasons why I left very unhappy was that Occupy was a bunch of suburban kids taking over an area that most of our people are homeless and live in. And the moment Indigenous people came around, they called the police, and the police came. And if I call the police may not come. And when you spoke about a 30-minute pat down, I just this weekend was given an incredibly brutal pat down going just to Toronto and back. And, you know, we talk about being proud about wearing your hijab. I forget when I wear my earrings and I have my hair down long that that's a big signal to anyone in a uniform that they can molest me, because it has been done, it continues to be done, and if I'm found missing or murdered, not many people will care to come get me or to fix that, because, you know, in order for everybody else to live here happily, they need to eliminate me, my daughter, and everybody else. That's the way it works. That's colonialism. So no, I don't feel safe gathering in large groups. I don't feel safe being proud, wearing my ribbon skirt. You know, at the end of the day, I have a smudge that's nicely in my pocket here, because I certainly am not allowed to continue to smudge anywhere I want. There's, you know, Canadian colonial laws now and Canadian standards on, you know, smoke detectors and such. I'm just simply not allowed to smudge. It's that simple. So no, I don't feel that there's been changes, and I don't feel like Canadians understand, and I don't feel like Canadians are doing enough to change these laws. I kept bringing up White Goose Flying Report as one things that candidates could do, mayoral or candidates, and not only did I see zero activists talking about it, I seen zero voters talking about it, but I seen zero candidates and zero mayors talking about it as well. I was literally the only person in over 1 million people talking about White Goose Flying Report. So it's very sad and depressing for Indigenous today, but I'm just gonna keep talking until I go missing or murdered.
And do any of the other women want to comment on how you feel safe or able to gather to participate in community and religion?
I want to add a comment only about Calgary this summer. This was a very tough summer, I would say, for lots of Muslims, when some of the white supremacists gathered in the city hall and they had demonstrations against Muslims. It was the first time, like, I've been living in Calgary for 6 years, and it was, I think, the first time that I really felt very, very sad that we in Calgary, we have reached this situation.
Okay, is it okay if I move to our very last question? Because I know we're getting close to time, but there's been so interesting that we want to have one more.
Last question, that's a lot of pressure.
But it better be good.
Yeah. But I want, just because something Michelle said, I want to highlight, and it just completely blew up my brain when you said my identity entitled some people to have the right to molest me just because of my identity. And I think that is really critical, because I know Indigenous people and I know Muslims feel that way, that just because you have this identity, some people in the system have this entitlement that they have a right to molest you in whatever way, whether it's verbal, physical, or even through legislation, whatever it is. All right, so sorry, that has nothing to do with my question. My question is how, and I'm going to preface it with a few things. The question is, how do we get more Muslims becoming storytellers and telling pluralistic stories? Because everyone here has told some fantastic stories coming from diverse perspectives, but we have a limited voice in the media spectrum. But fortunately, these days, the media spectrum is opening up a tiny bit, whether it's through traditional media or other media we can get out there. And the reason I say that is I hate the idea that we feel like we need to tell our stories to justify ourselves, but in reality, when we're living in a democracy where public whims and voting decisions are based off of people's perceptions, we have to inform those perceptions in some way. And sometimes it's not about saying this is what Islam is, sometimes it's literally just an emotional connection to someone. And then on the other side is, I'll just say, social activism sucks. It is really, really hard. It sucks being a social activist. It's something that eats away at you. And I always say this to my friends who also pursue social justice. Like, we know it's difficult, but we just kind of have to live in that space. No one ever said, if it was easy, it wouldn't be social justice. So how is it that you can kind of round out the edges of, and the one thing I like about storytelling is I find that's a fun way, a positive way of doing social justice. And sometimes you have to be very vulnerable, like Nadia, thank you so much for sharing your story. And in some ways you can tell stories without even talking about Islam. But I guess the big question at the end is, how do we promote more Muslim or even indigenous or other marginalized minorities to be storytellers to really push the discussion in Calgary to inform policy in the bigger system? Yeah.
So although the question is about storytelling, if you could keep your answers very short.
I'll be short. I am in education and at the university, and I think that it just falls on our shoulders as individuals to promote and to push that forward. For example, as teachers, I hope that they will bring into their classroom, into their elementary or middle school or high school classroom, a place, a platform, or the university, a place or a platform for these stories to be told. So if you're in a position to host these stories, to invite these stories, I encourage everyone, but I do believe that it is everyone's responsibility to do this and to push this forward.
Okay, I'm gonna close, and I actually say thank you very much for being able to offer a place to hear these stories. And I know we've heard some really 5 women who have told really 5 very powerful stories, and I hope that someday here in Calgary and here in Canada we will be able to really have women who are realizing their full potential in able to celebrate their culture and their religion and their beliefs in ways that we can all embrace. So I really want to thank the women for. And I do have some other words. So thanks again for the presenters for really sharing their deeply personal stories. And I guess the job is now for you to take what you've learned and to share them, similar to what our last commenter said, so that we can be involved in making the changes that we want to see happen. So some of the things, you talk to friends, family, neighbors, co-workers, talk to people who are Muslim women, write to the media and to politicians, keep learning, and there's an upcoming event that we wish to share to you. The Hussaini Association of Calgary is sponsoring the annual Imam Hussain Day Peace and Unity Seminar on Sunday, November 26th, and I think there's information about it out on the podium. Don't forget to check out the other materials, and please buy her book, because from what we heard, the poetry is so amazing. I think the book should come with an audio of you reading it, because that's key. And if you could make a donation to support the event and other events like it. And thanks once again. It was really so powerful.